Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, one of the giants of
Finally.
contemporary American history, died yesterday at the age of 84. That was former Vice President Dick Cheney. I have to say, I assumed he was older, because he's been around
Well,
for so long. I thought he
and
was in
George,
his 90s.
talk about serendipity. It was 5 minutes before I did my recording yesterday, and you know what the title of the program was? Neocons always win.
Right, right.
What? And I mean, it literally 7 minutes before I went in, they said, Peter, Cheney's dead.
Yes, yes.
84. And just like George, I thought, you mean 94?
Yeah, it's like because he always looked much older than his than his years. And so in the newspaper articles yesterday, they said, oh, he was only 5 years older than George W. Bush, the president. I thought, no, that can't be right. Surely he was of a different generation. I mean, you just because he always seemed like a kind of a father figure. I had no idea there was only a 5 year age difference between them. But anyway, the Dick Cheney obviously has been a very influential figure in the on the American political scene. He first emerged as a kind of on the national political scene as White House Chief of Staff to
Gerald
President
Ford.
Gerald Ford. Very young, it was like we were talking about Mandani. He was an extremely, I think, he was the youngest ever White House Chief of Staff. Then he was a congressman from Wyoming, which only has one
And Wyoming only has one congressman. So he was the congressman from Wyoming.
congressman from Wyoming, the very seat that his daughter Liz then took up and then was kicked out of. And of course, almost immediately, as soon as he was elected to the House in the late 1970s, he moved into a leadership position because people like him, leadership position. And then he was tipped by the elder Bush, George H.W. Bush, to be his defense secretary once his first defense secretary was rejected by the Senate, John Tower, for too much alcohol and too many women. So that,
A mark of his generation. Okay.
exactly. Um, Now, you were saying about this neocons, and this is why it becomes interesting because if you look at his early part of his career, he seems like a pretty much standard issue Republican establishment.
Eisenhower Republican.
Exactly, Eisenhower Republican, after all, Gerald Ford, exactly who Gerald Ford was. And Gerald Ford obviously liked him. He kind of promoted him to be his chief of staff. And then when he was George H.W. Bush's Secretary of Defense, he supported Bush's policy, which is we're not going to invade Iraq. We're not going to remove Saddam Hussein from power. We're just going to have a limited military operation. We're going to throw him out of Kuwait, and then that's it. We're going to just call it for an end. So from that moment, and that was a policy that Cheney had defended, and I remember him on television during those years. So we're not in the regime change business. We're not going to go and invade Iraq and occupy Iraq. That's a big thing. And then after 9/11, he became a very, very different figure. So it's really very interesting to speculate what caused this transformation when he really became associated with those vast disastrous military incursions of the younger Bush's era. Uh,
Yeah, well, I mean, and then he brought up an entire cadre of people around him, um, um, Elliot Abrams,
mm,
Pearl, all of these people, and he
Wolfowitz, yeah.
Wolfowitz, and we remember him mostly because of the wars of choice in the Middle East, and these were wars of choice for Israel, and it was very Israeli focused these wars, okay, and for Israel. And he also made an enormous amount of money through these
Right.
wars.
He did, and that's what becomes interesting because he leaves this position as Bush's defense secretary. That's in 1993, and then he gets a nice job at Halliburton. And it was always a little strange. I remember at the time because, well, it's an oil industry company. What's his connection with the oil industry? as it turned out, it was a very substantial connection. Which he became the CEO of Halliburton, made a lot of money on that. And then Halliburton played a major role in the war. So he became a very wealthy man. He came from modest means, um, moved within the Republican hierarchy. Being this establishment figure. But then money just poured in, and he became associated with the neocons, the very neocons that the elder Bush had kept at a distance. He knew that they were bad news. He kept them at a distance. And the elder Bush had also not pursued a particularly pro-Israeli policy, because after Gulf War One, he said then, I don't, the one country I don't want in my coalition is Israel. I want all the Arab states in my coalition. I don't want Israel, because then everyone's going to go away. And then, of course, he organized the Madrid conference to bring peace in the Middle East, and that was the first time, the United States actually recognized essentially the PLO as a negotiating partner. That was Bush who did that. So Bush was not pursuing a particularly pro-Israeli policy. So Cheney then became this really the mastermind of the disastrous Gulf War. But one has to remember, one can't really personalize it too much, because there was a universal consensus
Oh yeah.
within
Yeah.
policymaking circles, and even in the UK, not so much in Europe, but in the UK, that this had to be done. There was very, very little debate about this.
But I mean, let's be honest here. I mean, Cheney was a masterful operator. Okay, he knew how to move people around. He knew how to move a policy. I mean, when you look at the Trump administration, these
Yeah.
people are varsity players in comparison. I mean, he understood how government worked, and he made himself very rich. I mean, they were multi-billion-dollar bids in Halliburton. There would be no bidding process, so a non-bid. They would just get, I mean, like George said, this is like an oil and gas company, but they were in the business of everything when it came to
Right.
war. I
Yeah.
mean, meals, tents,
Right. Yeah.
helmets, first
Right.
aid kits, you name it. They were involved in it, and they made a lot of money here. But I mean, also we have to remember in 2014, he was asked about his attachment, and the way people perceive him, his legacy, and he said he had no regrets whatsoever. Okay, and Liz, his daughter, echoed that even into up until 2020, what was when she was defeated, 22.
Um, no, I think it was so. She was. That's a very good question. Was it before the 22 cycle? I think it was before the 22 cycle. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, and it's interesting to note. I mean, George and I obviously not fans of this guy, but it is worth thinking about it because, and maybe there's no definitive answer. Maybe George wants to take a stab at it, but in my mind at least, he kind of formulated the DNA of American foreign policy for this century. He plays a very pivotal role in that. And the question that needs to be asked, and it's not, I know Trump supporters will not like this, but is Trump now a neocon? And
Right. That's a very interesting question. But I do tend to think that there's just this consensus. And Cheney was just it was masterful. He was look. I mean that first Bush team, Baker, Colin Powell, Brent Scowcroft, Cheney. I mean, it was a well-oiled machine. Whether you like their policies or not, you think this is a very smooth running, well-oiled machine. Everyone knew exactly his role. The consensus was forged very quickly. Nothing like that has happened since, with all the infighting and so on. So Cheney was a part of that, but he was very persuasive. If you just look at him, he always speaks very soft spoken, but always speaks with a great air of authority. As soon as he starts speaking, wait, this is not someone you want to dispute. I mean, he obviously knows his stuff, um, and I think that helped persuade people. But he was lying. I mean, there was no question he was lying and lying and lying. But one has to remember, the Bush administration actually went to Congress and got congressional authorization for for both invasions, for the Afghanistan and Iraq, which is, no one else has done that.
And George, I mean, all of the names you just mentioned, the A team for
Hmm.
Bush Senior. I mean, they made a case to the people.
Right,
Okay, I
right,
mean, it was a well-oiled machine. I mean,
right.
I remember it like it was yesterday. It was just that you know, night after night, night after day after day, they controlled the narrative, controlled the narrative. We don't see that now at all. I mean, who do you believe, Tulsi Gabbard or Marco Rubio?
It is kind of the whole thing is kind
No,
of.
under Bush, well, actually, both of them, they really never let that happen.
No,
Very,
no, you're absolutely right. I mean, when we had, when Trump, basically ordered the attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities. I mean, he was naturally asked, "Hey, but your head, your ODNI has said that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapons program." Well, she's wrong. Okay, well, you hired her to be your intelligence person. She's in charge of all of your intelligence gathering, and you know better than she does. So you're absolutely right. You didn't have any of that, but Cheney was really quite a malevolent figure because in the run up to Gulf War II, he was leaking all this stuff to the media about Saddam Hussein, weapons of mass destruction, which itself was a huge lie. Because when you say weapons of mass destruction, people assume, okay, you're talking about nuclear weapons. And I think Condoleezza Rice
yeah,
talked
right.
about the mushroom cloud and everything. That's what people think. But of course, weapons of mass destruction doesn't necessarily mean nuclear weapons. It can just mean chemical weapons, and that could mean almost anything. You got some chlorine gas that you use as a disinfectant. Oh, chemical weapons, weapons of mass destruction, but they use that term to persuade the public of one thing, which when they actually something else was going on. But he leaked the stuff to his favored journalists, such as Jeffrey Goldberg, and then Goldberg would write it up. He was writing at the New Yorker at the
And
time.
then Cheney would say, well, according to,
Yeah,
exactly, circular.
exactly. That was very, very. He knew how Washington worked. He knew how the media worked. That was what made him so effective. But you said just a moment ago that he had no regrets, and he continued to defend the policy years and years after he had left office. So somehow he was attacking Obama. So somehow Obama was selling out America, was undermining American strength, and so on. And he would go on these TV shows. He would defend the torture programs that the Bush administration had engaged. So still go on defending. Yeah, this was all perfectly reasonable. That's not torture. And not torture. How would you like to do that?
Well,
Um,
I mean, also, George, I mean, what's interesting, what's the last time that we really talked about Dick Cheney? Well, we talked about him in the last election cycle, how the Democrats,
yep,
feted him
yep,
and embraced him.
yep.
Okay. So, I mean, so what do we have a competitive political system for? I mean, we can argue all we want about who uses a woman's bathroom, but we don't really are allowed to really talk about issues of war and peace. I mean, remember Kamala Harris and Liz Cheney were doing a tag team in the
That's right.
last weeks of the
That's right.
campaign.
The tag team. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a very good point, and that's a very interesting point because the rehabilitation of
Rehabilitation.
Bush and Cheney was a sight to behold. Because while everyone supported the Iraq invasion, once it started to go south, people then immediately distanced themselves from
I
it.
didn't
Oh,
vote for it.
I was
I
against
didn't
it.
vote for it.
Yeah, I was just like Vietnam. I was always against the Vietnam War. So it's like so the same thing with Gulf War, um, and so Bush and Cheney were now regularly attacked. Everybody would attack Bush and Cheney. Cheney was this Darth Vader and this evil mastermind and so on. And then particularly in reaction to Trump, when Trump first emerged on the scene in 2015, suddenly they were just wheeled out because they hated Trump. That Bush, he never actually explicitly said. Everyone just assumed Bush hated Trump. But Cheney absolutely said that, yeah, that he detests
Well,
Trump.
he had his daughter as the mouthpiece.
Exactly. Exactly. And then he made these advertisements on behalf of his daughter, whose campaign was going down. And Trump is the most dangerous man in America. And suddenly he became the liberal media's darling. Oh, great. Dick Cheney, hey, this is a guy who was defending torture, defending everything. He defended the invasion of Iraq, defended everything that was done, the whole weapons of mass destruction hoax, the Al Qaeda hoax, everything. And now he's great because he's anti-Trump.
It's amazing how he was rehabilitated. The right, that's exactly the right word. He was rehabilitated. Okay, well, obviously in our lane, I looked at it. I didn't spend a lot of time on it because everybody says exactly the same thing. Okay,
Right.
there's very little comment about how he really was rehabilitated, and he was Mr. Bipartisan. He built a bipartisan coalition for these illegal wars, and he essentially died with that same coalition in
Right.
in place. It's really quite amazing.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
and he's how many vice presidents do we remember, George?
Well, we
A few.
but usually for a very strange kind of reason. We
It's straight,
remember
like Spiro Agnew or
exactly
something.
Spiro Agnew. We remember his fiery speeches because he had these great speechwriters working for him, like Pat Buchanan and Bill Safire. So remember him, and then of course his ignominious exit, and so people remember. But like Walter Mondale, I mean, does anyone remember Walter Mondale?
Even Al Gore, really.
Exactly, Al Gore. Exactly, it was a very nondescript figure. But it's the interesting aspect of it is that Cheney, who remained absolutely committed to everything that he did during the Bush years, you get the impression that Bush himself had regrets about it. I mean, he's kept a very low profile. I mean, since he left in 2008, which is now 17 years ago, he's hardly said anything. I mean, he's just, what is he doing? I mean,
He's
nobody even.
painting. He's
He's painting,
painting.
exactly.
He's riding his bike.
Riding his bike, and I mean, he makes no speeches. He makes no
Well, I
comments.
mean, there was one. I don't know when it was. Maybe it was certainly was before the last election cycle. He was at some maybe it was at his library or something like that, and somebody just confronted him with exactly what we're talking about right now. And of course, the moderator cut in and protected him, as
Right.
they
They
always
always do.
do.
Yeah. Yeah.
But no, he's experienced a modicum of rehabilitation because of the Democrats, okay,
Right.
but
Right.
not Republicans.
Right.
But the for me, it's the consensus is still there. I mean, yeah, Darth Vader. I mean, he played the part too in
Right.
the end, okay?
Right.
I mean, he was a very rude, mean guy,
Right.
okay?
Right.
If you got on the wrong side of him,
Right.
curtains for you.
Right.
But he building this bipartisan coalition. He was master at it, and you have to, George and I always comment on leadership qualities. He was a leader. He
He
really was.
was, and that's the thing that it was, it was bipartisan because people that forget that when they had the debate, it was a very extensive debate in the Senate about going to war against Iraq. All these senators, including Hillary Clinton, jumped up and supported the war on Iraq, and they supported pretty much the entirety of the Bush thesis, Bush Cheney thesis, which is that Saddam Hussein had some connection with Al Qaeda. Saddam Hussein had some
9/11.
connection with the 9/11 attacks. Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. So in other words, Hillary Clinton bought into the entirety of the Bush Cheney program. And as I say, Cheney had that persuasive quality that because he always looked very authoritative, the very commanding sort of figure, is like when he was defense secretary, he rides up and you think, yeah, that's the guy who was the defense
Well,
secretary.
all the more
Everyone
so.
knows that he's the boss.
All the more so. It's easy to forget. But take a look at the pictures of George W. Bush when he was elected.
Mm, yeah.
He's a he was a very young man,
Right.
okay?
As I say,
And
it's
then you
only a
have this.
5 year age difference
Well,
between.
that's how we started
Right.
this all. I mean,
Right.
when Dick Cheney was running as his running mate, yeah, the subliminal was he's
Yeah,
the adult
exactly.
in the room.
Exactly the gray eminence.
And you got to remember, everybody, who suggested that Dick Cheney become vice president? Dick Cheney did.
Dick Cheney. That was, of course, in itself masterful because Bush had assigned to Dick Cheney the task of finding him a vice president. So he's head of the VP search committee. Yeah, I'm going through all these, all these different names, senators, It's like, I've come up with the right name. Yes, me. Okay, I've gone through the list, a very extensive list, and there's no one who's quite as qualified as I am.
It's really, I'm going to have to run here, but it's very interesting. Ray McGovern, who used to do the daily briefing for Ronald Reagan. I think he's actually shown it online. Letters that he wrote to Bush Sr. warning the former president about people like Dick Cheney and these. We didn't. They didn't call them neocons then. I think Colin Powell just called them the crazies.
Right.
Um, uh, and he was very worried that, I don't
But
think
yeah, but
your son is in the best hands.
right, but Cheney wasn't really a part of that. Cheney was a part of the Bush senior team. That very solid. I remember, when Bob Woodward wrote a book about the Bush senior administration. It was called The Commanders, and there was a photograph of them. They're all there was Bush front and center, and then you had Baker, and then Colin Powell and Dick Cheney, and that looked like, they looked like a very formidable team. I,
Best and the brightest?
Exactly. But I just don't think Cheney really ever had any particularly strong beliefs in anything. I mean, except obviously very ambitious, knew how to press his case, and then he basically, when because Bush the elder was a kind of Eisenhower Republican, kind of cautious, prudent. So that's what he was during Bush the elder's term. Then it was the time for the neocons. But in that first term, in that first Bush term, they kept a distance from the neocons. They didn't want to go on all these wars that were disastrous, and which the neocons almost brought down Ronald Reagan. I mean, they with the Iran Contra. So Bush, the senior, said, "Hey, we got to keep these people at a distance. They're gonna lead us into
Yeah,
terrible
yeah,
wars."
well, I'll end on by saying these neocons, they're reptilian. They can survive any kind of change in the environment, and they maintain their DNA. And I
Right,
would argue they do to this day. All right,
right.
I'm going to have to bounce here. This is the Gaggle with Peter and George. We're on local, so please go to thegaggle.locals.com. Don't forget the tip jar, and George and I will reconvene on Friday, then Sunday, and the live stream on Monday at 10 o'clock Eastern Time.
Exactly. And then you got to think about Buddy and Buddy with his doing all these flow charts and business models and like revenue and expenditures, and it's exactly saying, hey, this isn't fitting. The revenues are just not coming in. So we don't want Buddy to get too anxious and too depressed. So we're very grateful for all of your help, friendship, and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve the technology, and we'll be able to calm Buddy down. Take away these flow charts.
Calm some fur. Yeah.
Exactly. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye bye.